I'm Zach Walker, and this is the DIUx podcast. I'm joined today by Raj Shah, a former director of DIUx. He joined in May 2016 and kicked off what we know as DIUx 2.0. Raj, thanks for joining us today.
Zach, thanks for having me here, and it's great to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. So I'd love to just jump right in, if you don't mind saying. Again, you came to DIUx in May 2016. We started DIUx 2.0. What is the story of how you came to DIUx?
Yeah, no, it was a winding and twisting path of how I ended up there. I think we have to back up even say, why did DIUx start in the first place? I think there was a recognition by the previous secretary and the vice chairman's office that the Pentagon was not getting access to all the great technology that was coming from the private sector, in particular young technology startups, and they needed a better way to access it. I got brought into the picture along with my three partners that joined in the fall of 2016. And unfortunately, my predecessor was not given the tools and resources required to be successful and to try to be an entrepreneur within the world's largest bureaucracy, the Department of Defense. Fortunately, the Secretary of Defense at the time, Ash Carter, and his staff really believed in the mission of what DIUx, now DIU, became and is, and was willing to make the changes to give them those resources. So I got brought in the planning process in the beginning of 2016. Sorry, it actually started in the fall of 2015. I got brought in the beginning of 2016, and we're begin to think and work on the foundations of success for DIUx.
So you were on the Valley as DIUx got off the ground. What was the perception like before you were brought in as the second director?
Yeah, I think in general, right? So even out beyond DIUx, I think that in general, the Valley looked at young startups working with the Department of Defense as a negative, as a distraction. In fact, my very first startup that I did was a cybersecurity business. My founding team was from Fort Meade, NSA. We knew that the technology, cyber defense technology we were building, would be helpful to the department. But I think after my 11th meeting with some random general, my own investors, the venture firms here, basically said, stop wasting your time with the government. Don't spend any effort trying to sell to them. It's going to lower your valuation. And when we ended exiting the business a few years later, we actually had zero government revenue. So I think in general, the advice to startups has always been out here, don't work with the department. I think previous attempts to sort of bridge those divides had not gone well, because at the end of the day, nothing speaks stronger to companies, investors, and technologists than actually seeing their products get acquired and used for missions, right? And if you're not doing that out here at the time, it was really hard. And so I think that was the challenge for the first instantiation of DIUx, is that the mandate that they had did not include actually getting technology to warfighters.
And so coming in, that was clearly going to be a focus of yours. Did you have any other preconditions or things that you wanted to see change to take the job before you talked to SecDef?
Yeah, no, we did, and it was an ongoing process and dialogue with the secretary's team as to coming and joining. So, if I thought about it, to me there was 4 things that would have been really, really critical to be successful in this mission, which everyone knows and the importance of, right? Which is harnessing commercial technology and innovation for our warfighters. So first was a very clear mission, right? What are we here to do? The second was having the right team, people that deeply understood the Pentagon and operations, but also deeply understood and had the relationships out here in the Valley. And I use the Valley, Zach, very broadly to include places like Austin, Texas, and Boston. Thirdly, the resources and the ability to maneuver and execute. And then finally, all the things that we need to move very quickly to have the speed and the motivation. And I can go through all those in more detail. And I think we went back and forth with the secretary in the office. We listed out some very specific types of authorities that we thought we would need to be successful. And to the credit, the secretary and his office actually agreed to that. I received some really great counsel from some former 4-stars and some former White House people that said you should actually write these out, put it into a term sheet, and see if the secretary's office would agree to that. So we actually did that. We sent it up, and in fact, when I at first I thought the list was so aggressive that there's no way they would give me the job, and I would get to remain in my cushy private sector world. But I was quite surprised to hear that they would like me to come out to DC in the next week and meet with Secretary Carter and his team. I did that. They offered me the role, and I said I'm very excited about it. But I need this sheet of terms agreed to, and so that took a couple more weeks with the lawyers. And I think that was really important because I think it set the right level of expectations. I think for the internal DIU people, I believe that's probably still on a shared drive somewhere. But it was things that would not be unusual for people coming from the private sector. Simple things such as being able to choose your own team, hire and fire your core organization. That's not always true in some places in the department. And being able to take your budget and use it as you please. So I think those were the pieces that were important. There was one key part though that was ultimately valuable, which is the secretary moved the reporting structure from one of the undersecretaries to him directly. And that really empowered us to do things differently. Secretary Carter and his staff, they really want us to try something new, to move at a speed the department's not normally used to. And whenever you try to do something innovative or disruptive, there are folks and organizations for whom the status quo deviation from is not a good thing for them. And so there was definitely some antibodies, and we had to get past that. And I think with the secretary's support and having the right team, we were able to do that.
I don't think I've met anyone else that has gotten the SecDef to sign a term sheet. That's pretty impressive. But you did mention that one of the big changes was to move DIUx from under the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition Technology Logistics up to the SecDef level. And as you know, we are now under the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. So out of curiosity, if that had been a non-starter, if you had not been able to move up to the SecDef level, would you have taken the job?
I got great counsel from some of the advisors that said, look, to get this done right, particularly at that time when we were starting net new, right? We were building everything from the ground up, essentially. I think it was a really key enabler. And I'm fortunate, again, as someone as an outsider, I'd never served in the Pentagon and sort of anywhere near that realm. It was very good advice that, yeah, look, this is going to be high scrutiny because it's a Secretary of Defense initiative, and you're really going to need the support, of course, of him, but even more importantly, his staff, right? So, for example, one of the things that we outlined was we'd like a weekly call with the Secretary's Chief of Staff, where we could go through progress, get his assistance in moving different arms of bureaucracy. I mean, I think that the Chief of Staff to the Secretary is probably one of the busiest people in the building by far, and for us to get 30 minutes to an hour of his time every week, again, showed to the department and showed to us how important this was. And I think in general, right, if you look at organizational theory, and anytime any large corporation or organization decides to do things differently, it takes buy-in from the very top at the most senior level, right? The person that is seeing the vision broadly and knows they need to make change, and that public support of his, and the continued bureaucratic arm wrangling that takes. And so we were, again, very fortunate to get that and make it progress.
Building on that, I've talked to a few folks, and all of them come back to DIUx 2.0, your leadership really being that moment that DIUx changed and really became effective. I'd like to get your perspective on what it means to be an effective leader in a defense innovation organization like DIUx. How is that different than leadership in traditional DoD organizations or even an industry where you came from?
Yeah. I think the biggest difference is people underestimate or just can't even fathom the complexity of working in government. I essentially had 535 boards of directors, right? The folks that write our checks, members of Congress. Just the sheer number of people involved. And so we tackled that in a couple of different ways. We talked a little bit about the support. We also showed up with this sort of partnership structure because no one person had all, I think, the background required. So, there was 4 of us when we joined, and myself. We had an individual, Chris, who had worked as the the chairman's special assistant, who really understood the building. We had a guy, Isaac, who had been a longtime operator here in the Valley and had deep connections. Got a guy named Vishal, who was a technologist, who could really get into the nuts and bolts of things. And so I think it took a partnership approach to tackle it. But I think the biggest thing is the challenges, and I think we'll talk about it more later, but on the second day that I took on the job, I learned that Congress had zeroized DIUx's budget. And again, as a novice to budgeting, I didn't really know what that meant, but it didn't sound good. And of course, it was pretty bad. And so the next 6 weeks of my life was involved with trying to make sure the budget of this now, nascent organization didn't go to literally zero.
I had a chance to chat with Enrique Odi, and when we were chatting, he said you fully expected him to completely fail, but you let him do it. You supported him anyway, gave him the resources he needed. And for anyone that doesn't know, that's what resulted in Kessel Run, which is one of the most successful transitions, possibly the most successful transition that DIUx has ever done. Could you speak a bit about what it's like to encourage failure in an organization that is as risk averse as the Department of Defense?
Yeah. Enrique, as you know, ended up being and is one of the superstars of the Air Force and has built really a lasting legacy. I think the lesson again goes to understanding you may not have all the background and data to just rule by fiat, if you will. So Enrique, for folks that know his background, right, longtime active duty officer, but was one of the first original visionaries of re-architecting the IT systems, like this concept of cloud. Everyone talks about it now. He was talking about it 10 years ago. And he had come out to Stanford to do his PME for a year or two. And then we were lucky to have him at DIUx. And so he had this long vision of how do we transform the Air Force's backbone and its IT, and had this grand vision. I probably had spent one too many meetings at DISA in the CIO's office and was maybe more skeptical of his ability to transform the whole thing. But look, he technically understood it. He spent a long time on it. He's an incredible individual. And we at DIUx were there to do things differently, to take on some risk, experiment. That doesn't mean haphazard risk, but to push the envelope a little bit. And so, he felt so passionate about it that it was basically a bet on Enrique. Say, look, you believe in this so much, you understand it better than any of us. We'll support this and make sure you have the resources. And it took some twists and turns, but then ended up honing in on a very tangible problem to support air operations in the Middle East, and then has remarkably grown from there.
That's great. A big change when you did take over in 2.0 days was implementing the CSO Commercial Solutions opening, the special part of law, other transaction authority. Now, 4 years later, it is being used all over the DoD with great success. And I'm curious if you anticipated that when you started with the CSO, and if DIU should change the game again, and if so, how?
Yeah, no, I was very, very, very pleased to see the CSO spread across the department, and that was the hope. And it's just so amazing to see that. I think what people don't know is that the name CSO Commercial Solutions Opening was basically invented by Lauren Daly. Right? She came up with that idea, and we said, great, let's do it. The language even in the NDA wasn't as specific, and it was as good as name as any, and now it's stuck. So even here, it shows the power of an individual and her thought on, hey, I can build something around this new acquisition law, right? Because she was the acquisition expert that we had. So maybe it's instructive to step back. I think Zach, we've discussed this before, right? I used to talk a lot about, hey, if DIUx was successful, it doesn't need to be around anymore. But let me kind of step back and think about what is the real mission, at least as I thought about what DIUx was and is, and what innovation could mean, right? So to me, stepping in, the organization really had two core missions. The first one was to be an embassy to the commercial world, and in specific, the Silicon Valley world. It's something that was very foreign to the DoD in terms of capability, just the culture, and how best to interact. So one was to be that embassy and sort of change the narrative where young entrepreneurs like I was don't get advice from the investors, say, hey, don't work with me. How do we change that? And then the second was to be a 0-to-1 organization, to steal the parlance of Peter Thiel, which is how do you experiment very rapidly to create new processes, approaches, relationships, and do that invention piece, and then let somebody else scale. And in this case, it was, again, commercial technology to support national security. So, I think the first one will always be there. You need a presence. DIU is the largest presence here in the Valley from a military innovation standpoint, and is the trusted source. I think that's remarkable, and Mike and team are doing a just phenomenal job there. But the second part is that 0-to-1, right? So the first immediate mission that we were working on was, again, showing tangible results of getting capability into the hands of the warfighter. So most of that was around acquisition reforms and procurement. How do you buy something quickly in a time frame that is relevant to both the operator as well as companies out here, and how do you do it in a way that companies will take the time to build features and capabilities for their department. And the CSO was that answer, and there's lots of permutations now that have come. So I think that's actually working. And candidly, the services have the largest amount of budget, right? They own the programs, so they should take this and just supercharge it. That's not to say a role doesn't exist for further experimentation and further 0-to-1 type activity, right? And now I think what the opportunity that DIU has is that by having had success on the acquisition front, the team and you, Zach, have the credibility now to go in and submit and posit change in other areas, right? So I'll just name a few that we never got to when I was still there, but I've gotten there. I'll name you three. So one is we think about more macro type of policy when we think about our non-traditional industrial base. And Mike Brown started that effort with the Great China Report that resulted in FIRMA, and has totally changed how people think about minority venture investments in technologies that matter for the department. No one was thinking about that 5 years ago. So, he has done a great job kicking that off. But there's others, like our requirements process still take 5 years, right? We deliberately, for major programs, separate the operator from the engineer. Right? There's an acquisition person in between, a requirements person in between, and it takes forever. Are there better ways to do requirements? When we think about ConOps, and for example, the concept of operations of how we fight wars, what is low-cost autonomy going to change how we fight? How is AI? How is cyber? So I think there's roles for an experimental organization to help the department think about that. So I think, again, a very long answer to your question, Zach, but there's always room for experimentation and improvement. And the fact that the rest of the world or the rest of the department is scaling a thing, I think everyone should be extremely proud of.
That makes sense. So we may have dropped the experimental, but we should not stop experimenting is what I took from that.
Yeah, I see your logo still has an X on it.
It does. It does. It does. They changed that. What would you say would be the most valuable thing that you learned from your time in DIUx?
What did I learn? I guess the biggest thing I learned was that, again, if you have the right team, the right senior level of support, and a clear mission, you can actually get quite a bit done in a time frame that wows people. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you the number of people that told me our original approach, or even my joining this organization, was a foolhardy attempt. I've had people tell me it would have been the worst career decision of my own personal life. And I think people have been very pleasantly surprised to see how much can actually get done. I think when I joined, and our partnership joined, there was 11 employees of DIUx. I think they changed out 4 of them to bring us in. We had an office in Moffett Field that was some remnants of cubicles. Like literally there were still cubicles there, and there were folding tables. There was no internet even. They were using hotspots that would go in and out. And that's what we started with, right? And so I think, what I learned is just there's so much that can be done that you can set out big lofty goals, and they don't, you don't get to work on those big lofty things on day one. Like my day one was, how do I get internet? Day 2 was, hey, I'm on a plane to DC and they decided to cancel my travel card. So when I land, how do I come back home? Right? Like those are the issues that we dealt with in the first few months, but just an incremental fight.
Do you have any other stories like that from the early days that may not be as well known?
I have so many. I mean, like the roadblocks. So it's not ill-meaning, ill-meaning people, but I think when you try to do things that are different and you have a speed imperative that the Valley just brings, like, hey, I want to get this done in a day, not 2 months, right? Like little things just get trouble. Like we didn't want an office with cubicles, so it doesn't allow us to have good open communication, right? Well, evidently you have to get authority to take the cubicles out and get them to redo the office, but we found ways to power through that. We knew that we needed strong collaboration tools, and the department at that time was thinking about going to Office 365, but that was a 2-year implementation plan that they had. I said, look, we can't do document sharing and collaboration and remote email for 2 years. It's not going to work. And so we found a way to get G Suite to use that on day one, and it required actually getting one of the 4 of us partners to literally hop on a red-eye flight one evening with no notice to go and sit with the CIO and explain how we're going to do security around that. How do you hire people in under 30 days and not 180 days, right? This happened to me once. How do I fly to the East Coast without connecting in O'Hare to save $5, right? Like things like that required efforts. And so, but slowly but surely we went through each one of those battles and found the right way to do it. And the principles behind a lot of those things, right? Being good fiduciaries of taxpayer dollars, of making sure our IT systems are secure. All those things are super important, but you don't have to do it in a 1980s way. You could do it in a modern way. And that was that disconnect. And candidly, the broader mission of DIUx was to, again, be that bridge.
So Raj, any regrets?
Well, my biggest regret is not fixing the DTS system, because I still have to deal with that as a reservist. But that brings up to a good point, right? There's still so many programs and just basic IT programs, human capital, talent management things that we didn't get to tackle, and our ways to innovate. At the time, we actually did consider looking at DTS along with the Defense Digital Service folks. But in those early days, we had such pressure to prove ourselves, to prove our value, and to prove enough value to transition an administration that we knew was going to happen, and that the secretary was going to change. And so we focused in on areas that really were warfighting led, right? Like the Enrique program we talked about in the Middle East, where it was so important to ongoing operations and people in the field that it was just impossible for the other parts of the department to say, hey, that's a great little initiative. We got it. We're going to go and do something different. Whereas if we stopped doing what we do, it would tremendously impact people and turn off. So I would love to fix DTS and not have to use my card reader I see in front of me here today to spend 4 hours filing a travel report. But we didn't get there. Hopefully the rest of DIU will take that charge and fix it.
That's great. So a lot of our alumni are going on to do really cool things. Some still in the service, some outside, some still in defense innovation, some not. I'm sure everyone would love to know, what are you up to these days?
Yeah, so I've I had a wonderful run in government service there, and I loved it. It's the hardest, most interesting job, but it was the right time for new leaders and me to go back. So I've done a number of things. I've helped some of my previous colleagues worked on a new cybersecurity startup. So we're doing that. I've been trying to help other entrepreneurs that are trying to focus in on national security. So investing in advising there. One of the good things is that for me personally is that I've got to remain a reservist in the Air Force. So I still get to put the uniform on, a couple of days a month and serve in that capacity.
It's great that you're still involved in any capacity. We definitely need you. Any closing comments?
No, look, I think what I'd say to the DIU folks that are listening to this is that there is just immense opportunity for innovation. I think you guys have done quite a bit over the last few years since when I left. I think there's always more to do, and so I just encourage people to stay focused on the mission. I really do believe it's the single most important mission that you can work on if you care about open societies and the Bill of Rights. Society's built on Bill of Rights. So don't hold back. Think big. You've got a great team, and keep on fighting. And don't be, I guess, worried or alarmed when small bureaucratic things get in the way. That's just the nature of the beast. You gotta fight through them. But you got a lot of great things to be done.
Very true. Raj, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. It's been a tremendous privilege to get a chance to talk to you.
Thanks, Zach. Good seeing you.
Thanks. Bye.